Okay. Welcome. This project is made possible with funds from the Decentralization Program, a regrant program of the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Andrew M. Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, and administered by the Greene County Council on the Arts.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own way and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, don't you know? No more weeping. No more weeping over me. And before I'll be buried in my own and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Freedom. Oh, freedom. 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 Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'm going home to my Lord and be free.
And now I have the honor to introduce Marline Martin. She is the Executive Director of CREATE, the Greene Council County on the Arts. Previously, Marline served as Executive Director of the Leroy Neiman Art Center in Harlem. She has held leadership positions with some of New York's leading arts and cultural organizations, the Urban Dance Collective, the Caribbean Culture Center, and the Children's Art Carnival, among others. She is also a writer and a very well-known advocate for the arts. Marline.
Hi, thank you, Judy. Let me find that other voice. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Price of Freedom. Some pay more than others. As Judy stated, I'm the Director of CREATE Council on the Arts, former Greene County Council on the Arts. I'm also an artist, an arts educator, and an advocate, and sort of a history buff. I am very happy to be here with you today. It is the eve of the national celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And it is also today the birthday of Muhammad Ali, two of the significant champions of the civil rights movement of the 60s. So I'm honored to be a part of this conversation, to talk with two activists and witnesses, basically, because these are the people who actually were on the front lines, walking together with us on our march to freedom. It is James Baldwin who often talk about the price of freedom and what one does have to pay or what that price is. And in our history, the price of freedom is life itself. In 1964, less than 7% of Mississippi's African-American populations, I just try to get my notes in front of me, were registered to vote compared to the 50 or 60, 70% in other southern states. In most rural countries, African-Americans made up of the majority of the population, and the segregationist white establishment was prepared to use any means necessary to keep them away from the polls and out of elective office. For years, local civil rights workers had tried unsuccessfully to increase voters' registration among African Americans. Those who wished to vote had to face the local registrar, an all-powerful white functionary who would often publish their names in the paper and pass the word on their employees and bankers, and which resulted in loss of jobs, the threat of violence, enough to dissuade them from actually trying to vote. It was complex and arcane. But in 1964, a new plan was hatched by Robert Moses, a local secretary for the South Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, where he joined with forces of activists from the North for a massive effort. Most of the activists that came from the North were all whites. We see a little bit of this effort going on earlier last year during the Black Lives Matter protest at the death of George Floyd. I myself was a witness to that, having recently moved to the Catskill as the director of the council, to see over 1,000 people in that small town of Catskill. And the majority of the people in that crowd was white. I bore witness to that. And because of that, I agreed to do this presentation with these two lovely ladies, Judy and Judy. And it is very apropos that this conversation is happening today because of what is going on in our country. So I hope that you will listen to their experiences and insights, and also provide us with some insights, because the only way that we are going to have freedom, whether it's of speech or voters, is if we all make that commitment to it. So before I go on any further, I'd like to introduce to you Judith Wright. Judith, I didn't try to pronounce your middle name, Frieze.
Frieze.
Frieze, okay.
Okay.
I'm trying the French. Judith Frieze Wright. She's a visual artist and the author of Acts of Resistance. A freedom writer looks back on the civil rights movement. And Julie Kabat, a musician and the author of Love Letter from Pig, My Brother's Story of Freedom Summer. The way the discussion will happen today, it will be about 45 minutes reading. And then we will have time for a discussion at the end of the reading. If you have questions or comments, please put them in your chat. A note that in the readings, we will be using the N word instead of the other word. And you will also hear the word nigger and black, but this is all historic. And at the time, that was what, that was the time how Black people were referred to. So before I go on any further, I wanted to maybe get Julie is my first talk, right? Is it you, Julie, or is it Judy?
Judy.
Judy. Oh, Judy. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So Judy, what motivated you to join? And I don't know if, I think everybody will learn more about the Freedom Summer summer and the Freedom Rides through these conversations than any kind of synopsis that I can give, because it's coming from someone, as again, who's a witness to it and who experienced it. So Judy, what motivated you to join the Freedom Ride, and what were the Freedom Rides about?
Hi, everyone. I'd like to start out by telling you a little bit about how I became involved in the civil rights movement back in the early 60s. In the 50s, when I was a teenager, my parents gave me Exodus by Leon Uris as a birthday gift. The story about the struggle of the Jewish people to establish a homeland in what was then Palestine drew me into another world very far from the world I was living in. It also touched off a longing in me to do something important in my life, and nothing in my experience so far could compare to the drama and devotion of the characters in Exodus. My family lived in Newton, a comfortable middle-class, predominantly white community outside of Boston. It was happy. I already had Exodus that it wasn't the life for me. In the spring of 1961, when I was in college, when segregation was still in full spring in the Deep South, I became glued to the TV, watching reports of the first Freedom Rides. It was then that I saw my chance to participate in something that could really make a change for the better in our country. The Freedom Rides were an attempt to end segregation in interstate travel. Small integrated groups of people started riding buses through the Deep South, refusing to sit in the very back, where Black people had always been forced to sit. The riders were all arrested and jailed for this attempt. The goal was to fill the jails and hope the publicity would wake the rest of the country up to the segregation going on, and in the long run, to hopefully bring about a change. I decided to join the Freedom Riders and was arrested on June 21st in 1961 in Jackson, Mississippi. All the Freedom Riders were sentenced to 4 months in jail. We had 40 days to appeal, and if we didn't, we would remain in jail for all 4 months. So in order to fill the jails, we all decided to remain behind bars for 39 days, and then we appealed out. The following reading contains excerpts from my book, Acts of Resistance, a Freedom Rider looks back on the civil rights movement. So here starts my reading. It was frightening to discover that we were to be incarcerated at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, which was commonly called Parchman, and which had a reputation for exceptionally brutal practices. When we arrived, the women were separated from the men and led down a narrow stairway to a long, sterile corridor, on one side of which was an equally long row of heavily barred cells. This was one of Parchman's maximum security units and was reserved for women Freedom Riders. They kept us there not only to intimidate us, but to keep us out of reach of other prisoners who, if they were white, might attack us. With so much national publicity about the Freedom Riders saturating the country, A brutal beating was the last thing the state of Mississippi wanted. After each one of us were body searched, we were led to our cells, accompanied by cheers and singing from the women Freedom Rider prisoners who were already there. The cells measured 6 feet by 10 feet and held held 2 or 3 prisoners in each one. Iron bunk beds with old and thin gray mattresses stood against the front bars to the right. To the rear and visible to anyone walking by the cell were a toilet and a tiny sink. There were no windows in the cells, but up high on the other side of the corridor were small windows with views empty of everything but the color of the sky. When we first arrived, I had to deal with Deputy Tyson, the head guard, and the one who set the tone for all that was to come. He took away my asthma medication, accusing me of being a drug addict. Here it was, first day, and I was already terrified. What would the coming struggle to breathe be like? I asked if I could see the prison doctor. Sorry, Tyson announced, a nasty leer on his face. The doctor is on vacation. I used to be, as Parchman was a large prison farm with complete hospital facilities, but it was clear that arguing would get me nowhere except in more trouble. It took 2 weeks before the doctor finally came. He talked to me through the bars and declared that I was not a drug addict and could have my medication. With enormous relief, I saw Tyson come down the corridor, my inhaler in hand. But the respite didn't last long. When the doctor left a few minutes later, Tyson came right back down the corridor, took the inhaler away, and never saw it again. We were allowed to leave our cramped quarters only twice an hour in a small area at the end of the cell block. For exercise, we could walk up and down the narrow space beside our bunk beds and the opposite wall. Others weren't so lucky. If there were 3 in the cell, the third mattress took up that space. All reading material was prohibited except the Bible. We could only get mail twice a week. So the guards often gave me hate mail rather than the letters from my family, which I so anxiously awaited. Hot, bright lights burned 24 hours a day. After the first week or so, I began to have repetitive dreams. In the first, I was sitting on a swing, flying freely through the air, back and forth, with my hair flowing out behind me in the warm breeze. The second dream was that I was feasting on lobster. But difficulties, prison life was not all bad. Although the individual cells were segregated, the cell block was not. And though we couldn't see each other except for those in our own cell, and though our voices were clear all harder, we felt a deep connection with each other, all locked up for the same cause. Freedom songs rang out every day, filling the stale air with the soaring sound of the whole civil rights movement. We sang and sang, nourishing ourselves and keeping our spirits up with the joy of our togetherness in the struggle. We ignored the guards' demands that we stop because we wanted them to know that although they could imprison our bodies, our minds would remain free and strong. Many times they would punish us by coming through our block, clanking our doors open one by one, and taking away our mattresses. When we continued to sing, they repeated their rounds and took our blankets, towels, and toothbrushes. All that was left were our cold iron bed frames. Then they turned on the air conditioning full blast for hours. And yet we sang on with elation. Our most memorable pastime was our daily homemade, quote, radio program. The same prisoner every day would shout out, "Time for parchment hour." Then each cell up and down the line had to contribute something to entertain us and to help pass the time. A song, a story, a joke, it didn't matter. That was when we had the privilege to hear true and glorious gospel singing soaring through the air into our cells and hearts. One day, something terrible happened. My cellmate and I saw Deputy Tyson standing in the corridor near us, the usual smirk on his callous face. He was staring at Cindy, the Freedom Rider in the cell next to ours. We later found out that he was watching her suffering a miscarriage, for which, as far as I know, she got no medical attention. Time went by slowly. I came to realize how much life was taken from anyone in jail. I was only there for my 39 days. What would it be like for years or even decades? For me, at least, there was meaning and purpose and deep friendship, which was of great compensation. But despite the solidarity and belief in what I was doing, I couldn't help wishing the day would come when I could walk out the door. The Freedom Riders kept on coming and coming from all over the country. And by mid-September 1961, close to 400 of us had been jailed. The story was carried by newspapers and television throughout the country and woke people up to a situation that they might have known about but hadn't paid much attention to. That fall, segregation in interstate travel was ended. Importantly, the Freedom Riders inspired people from all over the country to become part of the civil rights movement. Sadly, if it had only been African Americans who had been thrown in jail there would not have been all those stories publicizing arrests and brutal treatment. At that time, the suffering of Black people never received much attention. None of us were aware of the actions of the part our actions would play in the long run. When you're present at the outset of the historic change, it never is clear whether there'll be a change at all. All we really had was intention, determination, hope, and each other. The Freedom Rides offered me the opportunity to take part in the world as I had always dreamed of doing, to participate in something I believed in and set a path for me to follow for many years afterward. That's the end of my reading.
Thank you, Judy. And Marlene, is there any question or comment in the chat or something you would like to say now before we move on to Freedom Summer?
There is no question. There's a comment that they love the title of your book. Let me see what it says again. Sorry. But I do want to make a comment or maybe ask that our participants do this. In listening to Judy speak about the radio show, because I as much as we can, give our own experience, I wanted to ask the participants if they could contribute something in the chat that speaks to them of freedom or what freedom means to them. And that's it. Thank you, Judy. That was really beautiful. So we could kind of have our own radio show, not necessarily, it can be entertaining, it can be a story, it can be a joke, it can just be a word. Words are powerful. And we can actually use those words to make a poem, but it's something that's, I think would just add to the conversation.
So Julie, can you talk about Freedom Summer?
Yes, I can. My brother Luke was one of over 1,000 mostly white Northern volunteers who spread across the state of Mississippi in the summer of 1964. The volunteers joined a grassroots movement already well underway, and they pledged to adhere to the philosophy of nonviolence, which was central to the mission. The Northern volunteers were able to lend support to thousands of local African-American activists and community members of all ages who challenged the myths of white supremacy and began to break down the power of the Ku Klux Klan. Freedom Summer was a bold experiment in creating social change from the ground up. I was 17 at the time. Luke was 8 years older than me, so he was 25. And before I continue, I want to just say a word about my book. It combines biography and memoir for a story about Luke's experiences, but also about our family and a wider history of the time. My reading today draws mostly on Luke's writings, so you get to know him in his own words. Tragically, he died of cancer just 2 years after Freedom Summer. So here's the reading. What motivated him to go? Luke scribbled a letter to our family on a napkin, postmarked June 1st, 1964. He wrote, "I intend to live a principled life and to work for the things I believe. This helps to give purpose to my life. I don't want to sit back while Negroes are being denied their rights. I don't want to let others do it because it is my responsibility too." Frightened, our parents insisted he come home to Rhode Island before going to Mississippi. So Luke flew home across the country from Stanford Medical School in California. Arguments ensued, but they couldn't change his mind. Like Luke, almost everyone who was part of the civil rights movement had to deal with the understandable objections of their terrified parents. Then, on June 22nd, 10 days before Luke was to leave for his orientation, we were watching the TV evening news when there was a shocking announcement. 3 young men had gone missing in Mississippi. 2 white volunteers from the North, Mickey Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, and a local African-American, James Chaney. The next day, President Lyndon Johnson ordered the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, to send in an FBI team to investigate. The FBI found the station wagon the 3 young men had been driving, burned and still smoldering. But the bodies of the men were not in the car. Journalists said they had disappeared. Mickey's wife, Rita, was convinced they were dead, but no one could say for sure. Rita declared fiercely, "It is tragic as far as I am concerned that white Northerners have to be caught up in the machinery of injustice and indifference in the South before the American people register concern." At home, watching TV, I glanced at Luke sitting beside me and saw tears welling up in his eyes. And yes, we knew Rita Schwerner was right. Without the death of the white boys, no one in the media would be paying attention. It's likely we would never even have heard about it. At his orientation, Luke was assigned to be a Freedom School teacher in Meridian, where Schwerner and Chaney had been working, and where Goodman, a new volunteer, had arrived less than 24 hours before they disappeared. Luke dedicated himself to the teaching. He loved the community he met, the children and the teens. Within the community, memories of Mickey and James were constant companions. I'm going to interrupt just for a second. Vicki, I I don't know why, but Judy is large and I'm not on the speaker view. Can you fix that?
You were large.
I was large? Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right, super, thank you. So, skipping to later in the summer, on August 4th, Luke's hand was shaking when he wrote this entry in his diary. On Tuesday night, I heard the news that Cheney, Mickey, and Andrew had died. Their bodies had been found. I was sitting in front of Cheney's aunt at Pete Seeger's concert when he made the announcement. She looked at me with startled eyes. Is it true? She asked me. I am his mother's sister. I am his mother's sister. My first feelings were shock, for I have been close to those who loved them. They insisted that the boys were missing and found comfort in hope. I have known intellectually that they were dead, but emotionally, I refused to believe it. I have been working at the community center that Mickey built, and he lives there still in the minds and hearts of the kids. They remember the story hour and how he played Frankenstein with them and many other things. So I feel that I know Mickey too. He worked so hard that sometimes he didn't eat for days. And when I go to Henderson's for lunch, I can feel him saying, Luke, get back to those kids. We've got work to do. There's freedom to be won. My next feeling was anger. I wanted to go to Neshoba County. I wanted to let Sheriff Rainey and his fellow murderers know that these murders will not turn us back. I felt that we must react immediately while people were feeling the full impact of horror and indignation. I wanted time and life to stop for a while and for all men to think about these boys, what they lived for and what they died for. We sang freedom songs at the Seeger concert, and I felt a deep sadness as I sang. I kept thinking that Mickey and Cheney and Andrew will never sing again. Listen to the words of the song. They say that freedom is a constant dying. As I sang, I listened hard to these words, and I forgot about the pretty melody and rhythm and felt sick. The price of freedom is so dear. FBI agents had been searching the area since late June to no avail, until an informant, Mr. X, gave them an invaluable tip that had led them earlier that day to an isolated farm. Buried deep in the ground, the bodies of the missing men were uncovered, stacked one on top of another. As the shocking discovery of the bodies began to sink in, the Cheney family planned a private funeral for James. But for the wider civil rights community, there was a compelling need for everyone to be able to come together in grief. What should we do? Luke asked. He wrote in a letter, we are planning a great march. We shall dress in black and march silently to the funeral of James Cheney. We hope that their indignation will overcome their fear so that the Negro community will unite for this event. How terribly important it is to learn from this experience, the horror and brutality of the system and the desperate need for love and brotherhood in our times. We hear about possible war in Vietnam. If you must blow our world to pieces, wait at least until we have won our freedom. The procession week began with marches converging on the central location, like the corners of the cross. Luke wrote, Reverend Culpepper and I led the Negroes from the South Side. There weren't many people there at 6 o'clock when I arrived, and this made me very angry. At first, Luke walked through the streets hollering to people on the sidelines. We are going to the funeral for James Chaney. He died for us. Come and join us. Come and help us carry on his work. We began to walk. Reverend Culpepper has a great craggy face, a face which tells a story of great suffering and great struggle. He is crippled and he walks with a grotesque stride, which brings his body high in the air and then low near the ground. He has struggled long and hard, and it will take much more than a crippling disease to turn him back. He was proud to be leading his people through the streets of Meridian. As we walked, more and more people joined our group. There were young people and old people. It was particularly moving to see the old women helping each other along, arm in arm, tottering along down Freedom's Road. White people came out of their houses as we walked past. I feel certain that some of the white people must have felt sympathy, and that some of them would even have joined us were they not afraid of the disapproval of their neighbors. When we reached our destination, there were probably over 1,000 people gathered in front of the First Union Baptist Church. The memorial service for James Chaney was an experience I will never forget, a perfect blend of religious respect for the dead and a call to struggle for freedom. Dave Dennis, Assistant Program Director of the Mississippi Summer Project, gave the most impassioned speech I have ever heard. His voice was choked with emotion, and he cried with racking, convulsive sobs. He was furious and felt that everyone in Meridian should have come to the funeral of James Chaney. And to those who didn't come, he said, I'm tired of going to funeral and memorial services. Too many of our best people killed, and you ought to be tired too. They tell me that I ought to love the white people who kill us, but I'm sick and tired of loving. I'm so full of anger now, I can't love anymore. And you ought to be angry too. Everyone ought to fight the fight that they were fighting. To those who can sit back, who didn't come tonight, who won't carry on their fight, God damn your souls. He cried and gasped, I can't stand it anymore. And he left the pulpit. Many people began to cry. The Chaney family began to cry. And in this moment of grief, TV cameras moved in, bright lights were flashing, cameramen crowded around to catch the pain and sorrow on the faces of this family. A man next to me cried loudly, and I felt tears streaming over my own face. At the end of the evening, we all joined hands and sang with a great, beautiful feeling from the bottom of our hearts, we shall overcome. Afterward, as Luke's friend Gail Falk and he were walking home, Ben Chaney, younger brother of James, came running up and called out, come with me, Luke. Luke wrote, Ben is 12 years old, and he looks very much like James. We walked hand in hand to Payne's, and I bought him some ice cream. He talked about Mickey. Mickey used to have a story hour, The kids could pick out any book and Mickey would read it. Ben pleaded, "Luke, will you promise you'll have a story hour at the community center again?" "Yes, I promise you, Ben." I walked with Ben to his home. And Luke wrote, "We are living and loving and fighting hard for the things that Cheney lived for. We died a little with him, but we live a little for him." Later in August, Luke left Mississippi and went with his friend Gail and many others to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. He visited home, he brought Gail with him, and I got to meet her. And then he returned to medical school. But he left for Meridian at the first opportunity before Thanksgiving. And he stayed for 6 action-packed weeks. And this is when he met Judy, and they became friends. So Judy, why did you and your husband Sib go to Meridian just after Freedom Summer in the fall of 1964?
Well, after I came back from the South in 1961, I finished my education and met my husband, Sib. I kept seeing things on TV, and I saw civil rights protesters being sprayed by fire hoses. I saw the story of the 3 young Black girls killed by a segregationist in a church in a bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. Some of my friends from my Freedom Ride experience were still there. And I felt that I felt that that was where I belonged. Sib and I talked about it and decided to head back south to Meridian, Mississippi, to work in the civil rights movement there for a year. During the time that we were there in Meridian, Mississippi, in mid-November, Sib and I and some of our co-workers were invited to the home of Fannie Lee Cheney, James Cheney's mother. Here's the story from my book. When we arrived in Fannie Lee Cheney's kitchen, her 2 surviving children were also there. Ben, age 12, who loved to hang out at the COFO office with us, and his older sister, Barbara, who loved to tease us by dividing the races into 2 groups, which she labeled colored and colorless. We never lacked subjects to discuss. Sib being thrown in a 1-room country jail with a dirt floor for an allegedly broken taillight. It wasn't broken. Sandy Watts spending weeks in the Meridian jail for unwittingly receiving a stolen radio that had been donated to our office, or the picket line that we were planning for the next week. Later in the evening, after Fannie Lee's delicious meal, the conversation slowed and I heard Fannie Lee say, "It's all my fault. I never should have let him leave the house that day." As if she could have known. "If it was only my son James," she continued, "the courts would be ignoring it. But he was killed with those 2 white boys, so now they'll have to do something." The next time I saw Fannie Lee was on a drizzling day 3 weeks later, on December 10th, 1964. 19 Klan members, including Sheriff Lawrence Rainey and Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price, who had arrested the 3 boys and turned them over to the Klan, had been arrested by the FBI for the murders of Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. A preliminary hearing was being held to decide whether the cases should be sent to the grand jury. Since only the states can bring charges of murder, and Mississippi refused to do so, the U.S. Attorney's Office had taken over, but could only bring the outrageously feeble charge of violating the three young men's civil rights. About 100 people were allowed into the courtroom. I sat with 20 or so local Black people and COFO workers, including Luke, on a long bench about halfway back. I wasn't actually expecting anything legal and fair to be decided, but I still clung to some little bit of hope. The guilt that these men shared was so clear that maybe just this once, justice might prevail. Maybe this time, all the recent publicity would force the murder of a Black person or a white sympathizer to be deemed a crime rather than a service to the community. The defendants, all members of the Klan, were arranged in rows behind a wooden railing to the front of us and to the left. A sick feeling went through me when I saw Sheriff Rainey with his heavy booted foot slung up on his other knee, showing his hairy calf. He was slouched down, his big belly creating a mound under his tight shirt. He held an enormous bag of Red Man tobacco, and his cheeks bulged out like balloons ready to pop. He was clearly the leader, clowning with his followers, and his mouth was open in a huge, repulsive grin. Next to him was Deputy Sheriff Price, with a confident smirk on his face. All the defendants grinned and whispered to each other, every single one cocksure that the state of Mississippi would never, not ever prosecute them for getting rid of who they referred to as that nigger and the white troublemakers. The hearing began. The evidence for the prosecution consisted of a signed confession by one of the defendants, Horace Doyle Barnett. Commissioner Esther Carter, in charge of the hearing, refused to admit the signed statement because, she insisted, only one FBI agent had heard it. And since Barnett was not in the courtroom, it was considered only hearsay evidence. Enraged, the prosecuting attorney jumped to his feet, but Carter was adamant. And the small hope that I sheltered began to sputter and disappear like a small fire extinguished for lack of air. In the end, all the accused were released without having to post bail. Esther Carter had dismissed the charges. My shoulders slumped and I groaned softly, my head in my hands. I looked down the bench at my coworkers and saw similar poses and some tears. I heard cheering from various people in the courtroom, but it was the sounds of anguish that overwhelmed all else. As we left the courthouse, the defendants and their lawyers were slapping each other on their backs, laughing and congratulating each other. Outside the building, an old Black woman was kneeling on the sidewalk crying, "Jesus, no! Jesus, no!" Nearby, Fannie Lee stood in her gray coat with her head bent. I could see only her back, but she was holding on to Barbara and Ben, and her shoulders were heaving. Excuse me. In 1967, the 19 men were finally tried. 7 of them were found guilty. 9 were acquitted, and the jury was unable to reach a decision on 3 others. Deputy Sheriff Price, who had arrested the boys and turned them over to the Klan, served only 3 years.
Thank you, Judy. Let's
You okay, Judy?
Yep, I'm okay. Just a little frog in my throat.
Okay. Very emotional, that piece is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's talk briefly about nonviolence, the philosophy at the heart of the civil rights movement at this time. Although idealism and the concept of nonviolence were what first inspired Luke to volunteer for Freedom Summer, actual experience was changing his perspective. It proved to be love for individual people rather than belief in an abstract concept. Here is an excerpt from a letter of Luke's. I thought of the Memphis orientation and how they presented us with the question, is your commitment to civil rights so strong that you are willing to die for it? The question then was abstract and unreal for me. At the time, I didn't know any of the Negro people of Meridian. Had I known Mrs. Heidelberg and Reverend Culpepper and the kids of the community center and my Freedom School students, I would have come to Mississippi without hesitation,
Can we
where I
turn this
love
on?
them and care for them.
I want this to be, I don't want them.
It is tragic that barriers so foolish as color differences prevent whites and Negroes from knowing and loving each other. And it is only when these barriers are destroyed that any of us can find freedom. Luke remembered what Laurice, a 15-year-old Freedom School student, had written in an essay about nonviolence. Some whites think they are really hurting us, but in the eyes of God, they are only hurting themselves. Luke scribbled into his diary, I am fighting a nonviolent battle because I believe that hate begets hate, and perhaps that love begets love. Voter registration was central to the cause of freedom. Judy, unmute.
Mhm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry. I want to read you another excerpt from my book in order to show you exactly what the voting rights situation in the Deep South was like in the early 60s. The names of the witnesses in this excerpt have been changed. In 1964, the United States Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General John Doerr, was traveling in the South taking evidence that the voting rights of Black citizens were being violated everywhere in the Deep South. We were lucky, my husband and I, to be able to attend the hearing in Meridian. A group of COFO workers and Black citizens entered Meridian, the Meridian courtroom, found a long bench not too far from the front, and sat down quietly. Before us, and on the other side of a polished wooden balustrade, were 2 large wooden tables. At the one on the left were seated 6 white lawyers representing the state of Mississippi, and various county registrars, all of them relaxed, slouched, and chatting with a confident air. The table itself was cluttered with piles of massively thick law books and scattered papers. It was a crowded and busy tableau. At the table on my right, a lone, tall white lawyer in a dark suit sat with his hands folded calmly in front of him. His table was bare, no books, no papers, no associates. This was John Doerr. After the opening formalities, John Doerr stood up and called his first witness. Will Mr. William Ray please take the stand? A white man looking to be about 25, wearing jeans and a faded plaid shirt, stood up, walked past the onlookers, and took the witness stand. He leaned to the side in his chair, supporting his head with his left hand. Would you tell us your full name, Mr. Ray, excuse me. William Ray, and where do you live? Meridian, Mississippi. What do you do there? I drive a truck. Mr. Ray, are you registered to vote? Yes, sir. Mr. Ray, how far did you go in school? Well, not too far, about in one door and out the other. Did you go to the first grade? Suddenly, one of the lawyers at the defense table jumped up, holding a sheaf of papers in one hand and clamoring for attention. Looking at the judge, he shouted, "We object to this question and all other questions about this witness's qualifications to vote. Since he is already registered, any questions along this line would be immaterial and incompetent." Judge Cox, known as one of the most bigoted judges, looking extremely pained, overruled the objection. He might have been an ardent segregationist, but the last thing he wanted was to be reversed on appeal for upholding patently frivolous objections. John Doerr continued his line of questioning. Mr. Ray, do you read and write, sir? I can kind of scribble my name, but I can't read to do no good. Mr. Ray, I would like to read out loud to you a section from the Constitution of the state of Mississippi, and I would like you to tell me what it means. Here's what it says. All elections by the people shall be by ballot. Would you like to tell the court what it means, Mr. Ray? No, I wouldn't care to. Mr. Ray, you are of the white race, is that correct? Yes, sir. John Doerr, that's all for this witness, Your Honor. None of the defense attorneys attempted to cross-examine Mr. Ray. It was clear that any questioning would just make matters worse for the state of Mississippi. This strategy was repeated throughout the hearing. The idea was to minimize damage by getting white witnesses off the stand as quickly as possible. When it was time for the next witness, John Doerr stood up again and requested, will Dorothy Manuel please take the stand? A Black woman looking to be in her mid-30s and wearing a simple blue and white print dress walked up and took her seat in the witness box. Would you please state your full name? Dorothy Manuel, sir. How old are you? 39, sir. What kind of work do you do? I'm a high school English teacher, sir. How far did you go in school? Mrs. Manuel. I finished high school and went to teachers college. Are you a registered voter? No, sir. Have you attempted to register? Yes, sir. What happened? The registrar took out the Constitution of the state of Mississippi and without showing it to me, asked me to repeat Article 3 of Section 30, word for word to him. I generally know what Article 3 is about, but I was unable to do that. Did the registrar show Section 30 to you and ask you to read and interpret it? No, sir. He just said that I didn't pass. Mrs. Manuel, you are of the Negro race, are you not? Yes, sir. I am a Black woman. Were you threatened in any way when you went to register to vote? Yes, sir. My name was published in the local paper and I was fired from the part-time job I had then, working at Mr. Hughes' bookstore. The hearing followed along these lines for several hours. Mr. Dorr called at least a dozen witnesses, Black professionals who had failed the literacy test, sandwiched between illiterate whites who had no trouble passing it. When Judge Cox called an end to the hearing, we stood and headed toward the exit. I did my best to look solemn and dignified, while inside I wanted to jump up and down. If all the other hearings were like the one I just witnessed, there would certainly be a ruling, if not by this judge, then by a higher court, that the voting rights of Black citizens were being systematically denied in the state of Mississippi. Grabbing Sid's hand as we left the building, I looked up and saw that he had a huge smile on his face. I let go of decorum and matched it. This effort by John Dorr would lead the next year to one of the most important accomplishments of the civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Of course, the fight for voting rights continues, as we all know. There's voter suppression, claims of voter fraud. Have you heard that recently? Etc. Let's talk about some of the other accomplishments of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. After Luke returned from Mississippi in early January 1965, he found time to reflect on his experience. And he wrote, "The price of freedom is high. I feel that the most important contribution of our Freedom School was the training of future leaders for the Negro community, leaders who will fight for their civil rights. And I feel that it was a valuable experience for teachers and students to meet and become friends. We met many of the students before they had learned to fear and hate white people." One of Luke's former Freedom School students, Lisa, was 17 that summer. She and her younger sister, Dorothy, have reminisced about it. The three of us were out at lunch in Albany, New York, where they live now. And Andresa said, "We got to know the volunteers, you know, and they were the first white people we ever met who would interact with you. When they did it first, I don't know if I was overwhelmed or was it curiosity?" Dorothy cut in. "Down in Mississippi, white people were nice to you when you worked for them. I mean, they would talk to you if you were their maid or something, but not when you weren't working for them." Andresa responded, "The volunteers were different. They would actually play with you and not call you names." Gail Falk, whose name you've heard before and who I believe is on this Zoom session today, Luke's fellow Freedom School teacher, who is also a close friend of Judy's, wrote, "These children will not grow up like their parents. Freedom songs have been their nursery rhymes. For their parents, freedom still means danger and bombings and beatings. For the children we knew, freedom is beginning to mean friends and new ideas and being brave enough to start to dream about and choose the life they want to lead when they grow up and learning to make these dreams come true." And Judy, what other accomplishments?
Well, we've already talked about establishing voting rights for Black citizens, encouraging huge numbers of Black citizens to become registered voters. We've talked about desegregating interstate travel and providing a freedom school for Black voters. After we left Mississippi, the real fight for desegregating the schools and public facilities in the South began.
And what wasn't accomplished, what was undone since then? Despite the changes made during the civil rights movement, there is still so much we need to do, especially after the last 4 years. All this time, the nation hasn't really begun to confront the subtle, covert racism that is so pervasive north and south, de facto segregation. It's heartbreaking to think that so many Black people still live with the poverty and racism heaved on their backs since the beginning of slavery. Blacks live in exile within our own country, a country that celebrates its inclusiveness, but is still so race-based and exclusive. Back in the 60s, though we thought we understood what life was like for Black people, most white people, even sympathetic ones, only understood the surface of the problem and didn't really see white privilege. As time has gone by, we've become just a bit more sophisticated as we've begun to understand the depth of the inner and outer tragedy that racism has caused in Black people's lives.
I would like to just say a few words to end this. I'd like to end by describing a sign that I saw held by a white person in a recent Black Lives Matter demonstration. It said, "I understand that I don't understand, but I want to walk with you anyway."
And Marlene, you can take it away now.
Okay, let's see if I can do that. So let me go to some of the comments that were made on the chat because I thought that was beautiful. Kim Sykes says, "Love letter to Pig. I so love this title, Julie." Carter Wright, "Thank you, Aunt Judy." Gilda,
Thank you, Carter.
Gilda Perello, "Thank you for your courage, Judy." Diane Wartis, this was after I spoke about what freedom means to you, wrote, "To be seen, my friends who are Black or brown talk to me of not being seen by whites." Karen Shane, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, "Justice." Larissa Sellers, "Judy, thanks for your experience." Oh no, okay, I'm sorry. Somebody's calling me on my phone. "Thanks for your experience and for writing about it. I love your dreams while in prison." Thanks, Judy. This is Catherine Parnell. "Thank you, Judy." Thank you, Judy. Your book is a testament to the power of the written word. Ditto. Deborah Lambden, "I'm so proud to know you, Judy." Kim Sykes, "Allies," which is a response to the freedom question. Dr. Tanya
Devanzo.
Devanzo. "Freedom is space for authenticity." Nice one. Carol Moore, "Freedom is one of those ideals that no one can have until everyone has it." Great point. Truth to power there. Judy Matthews, "Freedom means every person has the right and ability to live their life the way they choose." Oh, I'm sorry, my video's off. Okay, I'll start it, sorry. Judy, I did that right. Kim Sykes, beautiful. Deb Colbert, wow. Rebecca McBride, freedom is inner as well as outer. Deborah Lambden, a little frog in all our throats. That was after Judy put a frog in all of our throats and caused some water to trickle down my eyes, that's for sure. Carol Moore, yep, indeed. Larissa Sellers, yes. Deborah L, that was from Diane. And then let's see, what is the title of your book and how can we find it? We gave that thanks, Wendy Wyack. So we gave that answer to that question. Luke and you, Julie, are a testament to your parents and your commitments to human rights. That is from Kim Sykes. Lisa Shapiro, I'm grateful to all of you for sharing your stories. The summers of the sisters are not irrelevant today. I'm sorry Luke is not here today. I'm going to move down. We gave the title of the book. Julie's the author of Love Letter from Pig, My Brother's Story of Freedom Summer, and Judith's book.
Marlene, let me just say where I am with this. Judy's book is available through Amazon, and Judy, I hope you'll talk about that. My book is soon to be in a final proof. Kat Parnell, who is on our Zoom, is an editor, an incredible editor in Boston, who really helped me to prepare the manuscript to reach out. And I'm very happy to say I now have a literary agent, but I have yet to prepare a book proposal, get the manuscript into its final form so that she can approach publishers. So my book is not published yet. Hopefully will be sometime, and Judy's is available.
And my book is called Acts of Resistance. A freedom rider looks back on the civil rights movement. And as Julie said, it's on Amazon. And I want to send out special thanks also to Kat Parnell, who helped me more than I could have ever believed. She was a wonderful editor for me and helped me through from the beginning to the end.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Wendy Noyes said, freedom, permission to be oneself in every way that doesn't infringe on the rights of others and to be respected on being oneself. I repeated something that was from Julie's book. For the children, we know freedom is beginning to mean friends and new ideas and being brave enough to start to dream about and choose the life they want to lead when they grow up and learning to make these dreams come true. Carol wanted to know, do you think Stacey Abrams has continued the work of freedom riders in Georgia as I do? If so, it is a sign that their work continues to have meaning in our current challenging times. Yes. All praises to the Queen, Stacey. That's what I call her.
Yeah.
Kim Sykes says, such beautiful writing. Thank you. S. Gott at Albany Law School says, or Law Education said, thank you. I feel like nothing has changed and hope with all my heart that I'm completely wrong. Richard Morrison, to everyone, says, very powerful. Thank you for being there, working for justice and bearing witness. Gwendolyn Schwartz, thank you for sharing your sensitivity and insight. Susan Griss, beautiful and moving presentation. Wonderful how you wove your stories together. Agreed. Ditto. Catherine Parnell, Julie, you present a tribute to what you can do by witnessing. Carter Wright, the passion of your commitment remains palpable. We are very proud of you. Stacey Abrams is an example of the continuance of the work.
Sir Tiller.
Sir Tiller Kabat. I am riveted during the reading, so beautifully written. Julie, so proud of you. To those, Deborah Lambden, to those of you who don't know, Judy named her son after Luke. Oh, you guys are breaking my heart here. Michelle, thank you for sharing and taking us on this freedom ride today. And Marlene wants to add something in as soon as she finds it again. I have too many screens up here. Okay, so I brought up the question of freedom, and based on what happened last week at the Capitol, I've been in a little bit of a conversation with my daughter, and just a reminder of you know, what happened there and how our struggle has been for so many years. And she reminded me of this Langston Hughes poem that spoke to freedom. Freedom will not come today, this year, not ever, through compromise and fear. Mm-hmm. I have as much right as the other fella has to stand on my own 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here too. I want my freedom just as you. And I want to thank Judy and Julie for planting the seeds, not just, and Luke, and Luke, not, you know, just in the 60s, but have continued to water and to nurture it and to make it grow. When I walk through Catskill, I will just go back to that because I've always gone to marches, but I've always marched with people of color, people who felt like me, who were treated like I was, who I felt really understood the challenge. And we don't always get an opportunity to say thank you to people who don't look like us, but who stand with us and try to help hold our hands or to be with us, stand by our side to go through the struggle. And so I want to thank you. And another great prophet of mine, I call him, is Bob Marley, who talks about the struggle. And he always makes me realize that struggle, everyone struggles. Struggle is something that's it's a part of life. Ours might be a different struggle because it's based on the color of our skin versus our ability to achieve and to dream. So I always remember who I am and where I stand in the struggle. And I thank you for inviting me to this conversation, to not only remember where I am and where I stand in the struggle, but to also realize that there are others who are standing with me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. And everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone who came to listen to this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we sure do.
Do we want to open up for anyone to say anything? I know there are a lot of people on there, but just I know we said that
there sure
at the
are.
end.
I don't know. Vicky Wills, I think, has to. I'm not sure if she has to unmute people, or people could just try to unmute themselves and see what happens.
She's allowed us to unmute. Thank you so much.
Ah, how nice to see everybody.
Mhm. And then now we can see everybody, right?
Well, sort of. A few people anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, so, we could chat for a couple of minutes here, I think.
Yeah, it's 4:30 now, so we started a little bit late, but we can just kind of entertain something for the next 10
Carter.
minutes. But you do have to mute yourself, though. If everybody start talking at once, there is a button called raise your hand, or you could just raise your hand and Judy will, Vicky will unmute you, sorry. Judy, Julie, Vicky.
It's great just to see people's faces. We're all
Yeah.
isolated now.
I have
Hi,
a
Carter.
hi, Julie, and Judith. I have a question. This is Kim Sykes. While you were talking, I was remembering this book that I picked up when I was at the National African American Museum of History and Culture. And I think I asked you about this already. It's called Breach of Peace. Yeah, are you with that, Judy? Come on up.
Yes,
Are you in this book?
my picture is in it on June 21st, I believe. But there's another version of that book that came out later. That there's more about me in it.
Wonderful. It's such a great book. I highly recommend it if you want to learn more about that summer, that Freedom Summer. It's so cool. Thank you.
Thank you,
really
Kim.
enjoyed today. It was quite wonderful, and writing was just terrific. And history is so important so that we don't repeat it. It's just quite wonderful. And thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Can I say something? I just felt very much like Judy's should become part of school lessons on civil rights. When did we ever in school hear anything like that? And I mean, I think it should become a textbook for public school, and Julie's as well. So I think the only way something like that can happen is if we actually go to our schools with these books and say, look, or just make them more well known, because look what they've done for us. And they could be giving so many people the firsthand experience that we've experienced. It's so moving, it's so important.
It's a wonderful idea. I want to ask Paul Murray if you have any thoughts about, because Paul served for many years on the Board of Education of Albany Schools, where my daughters went to school, and also taught civil rights courses at Siena College until quite recently. So do you have any idea of how would one get things into the schools?
It's going to be a real challenge, Julie. Teachers are swamped with so many mandates. The best way that I've found.
Paul,
Could somebody stop banging their pots and pans?
Please mute yourself. Thank you. Okay, continue, Paul. No, Paul, you're muted now.
My God.
Who's got pots and pans going?
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
No,
The
fine.
best way that I have found is working with small groups of students who might be interested in learning more outside of the.
Whoever moving pots and pans, please stop.
I can't find it. It might be Paul,
No, it's not Paul.
not who's talking. There's another Paul.
Oh,
So someone keeps muting me. But one of the best things that happened to me was taking groups of students into the South to meet with the veterans of the civil rights movement, to be in places like Meridian and Jackson and Tougaloo College, where I met Julie, to talk with the people who actually lived through that experience and have continued to live in Mississippi, dealing with the fallout from Freedom Summer, the changes that have happened and the changes that still need to happen.
Mm. Yes, Paul went, when I met Paul, we were both in Meridian. We were actually in Jackson, but in Mississippi. And Paul was on a bus with high school students from Albany and a couple of his, or a few of his college students from Siena College on this tour, with also Reggie Harris, the folk singer who was teaching them and singing freedom songs the entire time as you were making the tour through the South. Wonderful, wonderful thing.
But I think the single greatest source for young people would be the Eyes on the Prize video series. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely incomparable as far as capturing the reality of what happened. And I think every school should be making that available when the students are asked to learn about the civil rights movement. And it's available on the internet, and you can see, Meridian, you can see what happened in the Freedom Summer, both before and after. That would be, I can't recommend that highly enough.
Mm. Great, thank you, Paul.
Julie, I think someone else was trying to speak. Was it Paul also?
Oh, no, it's me,
Judy.
Catherine also, yes.
Yeah, there might be somebody else, but I'll go ahead and jump in. Julie and Judy, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much for this wonderful afternoon. And I'm sorry, my video is not working. There's something wrong with all the applications on my computer. I wanted to make two suggestions. One is, or ask you if you know about two things. One is over at BU, they have started something that you probably know about, the Center for Anti-Racist Research.
Oh.
Yeah, and Ibram X. Kendi is the director and founder. He is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's a fabulous center. And I think it would be a great thing to check into. They are advocating scholarship, and I think they're reaching out to communities. That would be one place where, boy, I hope both of you, that your books should be at that center. The second thing is, and this is craziness on my part, I was working with someone who was a Navy pilot, and he was based in Meridian. And he was based there in the late 90s. He knew nothing about Freedom Riders or Freedom Summer. And so my question is there any way in Meridian of connecting with the military base there and making sure that those guys, those men and women, understand that they are in a place of great historical significance? I know it's bizarre, but if you could reach out to just that one group and maybe get them thinking or start a discussion.
Kat, what's interesting is, I don't know, I only see a few people on the chat. I'm not seeing everyone, but I don't know your last name, Alva, but my younger daughter's friend from high school, Alva, is African-American and is maybe on our chat, our Zoom call today. Anyway, I just learned that she is a journalist now and a documentary filmmaker, making a film about Mississippi and what's happening in terms of voting rights today, but drawing on, of course, what happened in the past, because you can't talk about today without referring back to the 60s. So I think Alva's video is supposed to be posted online in some short period of time. But I'll have to find out more about it.
I have a question for Kat Parnell. Kat, I missed the name of the center at BU that you mentioned.
Oh, okay. It's called the Center for Anti-Racist Research.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat so that you can see it. And this also shows the director, who Kendi is one. So there it is for everybody.
Carter had his hand up. So
well, yes, I wanted to point out there's two Carters on the screen, and the one holding the photograph, that's Judy's ex-felon Judy Wright incarceration photograph, which I think is very noteworthy. It's on our screen. It's right directly under Judy. I don't know where it is for anybody else, but that's our son Carter's holding that up.
Thank you.
Also, somebody asked if we could put the name of my book up on the chat.
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you.
But I'll do it again.
Well, I don't see it, but that's okay. I don't need to see it.
Judy Matthews has her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you. Again, I enjoyed it very much, enjoyed the conversation. It was very thought-provoking. But also, I was a teacher at Chatham High School, and I know that one way to get books into libraries is to call the librarians directly or email them directly, because they often order books every year. So I think your book would be a wonderful choice. And if you just emailed some of the local librarians, I'm sure that they would be interested in putting it in, and then they can recommend it to students who are interested. So that's just another way of getting it into the schools.
Thank you.
I just posted Judy Wright's website on the site in the chat so that everyone can take a look at it.
Thank you, Kat.
Okay.
I think
Thank
we
you.
have another hand, Marlene.
Yes.
Gwendolyn? Oh, you see that? I'm sorry.
Oh, Gwen.
Gwen.
You want to say something, Gwen? I see you have a hand waving.
What about you,
Oh, and I don't hear from Gwen, but I see Nicole raising her hand.
Thank you. Thank you. I was afraid I wasn't being seen.
Oh.
I wanted to thank you both and Vicki for this wonderful, wonderful thing that you have done today. And it's just a shame that it's not nostalgic, because it's still here. And the things that we're going through today are just another reminder of how far we still have to go. And your contributions so add to this and make us realize that there is an emotional core to what we're doing and what we're fighting for. So I'm very choked up. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Michael, I didn't see Gwen. Gwen, are you there? I don't see your photo at all. Gwen,
yes.
Were you? Yes. Okay, Gwen. And then Michael. Gwen.
Okay.
No, because that works. I'm passing.
So,
Gwen, we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you
Okay.
are.
Okay.
Speak.
I just wanted to suggest that when you call the librarian and suggest that the book be put in the local high school libraries, that you also suggest that you could be there on a particular occasion to do a presentation from your books, because that would mean a lot to students if they could hear directly from the two of you. And as a high school teacher, I just think that is the best way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. Gwen and I have a long history from a long time ago. She was the most incredible high school English teacher who taught creative writing classes. And for 4 years, I had the benefit of working with her classes and the music classes. And we did seminars that had the students for a whole week. Just this intense thing combined with philosophy. It was pretty amazing.
Pretty nice memory.
Yeah.
Mhm. I believe Michael, was it Michael I called the last time I see?
Yes, Michael Frieze Wright.
Frieze Wright, right. And then, are you there, Michael?
I think he said he was going to pass.
Okay, so Kim Sykes, there are two images of you. So I see a gentleman was waving his hand. Is that, yes?
That must be Tom.
Can you identify yourself or unmute yourself? I can't hear you.
I am unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
My name is Tom Adcock. I am the husband of Kim Sykes. I'm related to Sykes on this for some reason.
Sorry.
Thank the two of you, Julie and Judy, for redeeming a word that is abused of late, but it's very important. You two are patriots in the best sense. You've seen something wrong with the country and you did something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And surround sound. Thank you.
Paul Murray, you have your hand up?
Yes, I have one more recommendation. A book about the freedom movement by a Black author. Coming of Age in Mississippi by Anne Moody was written.
I can't figure out how to do, I don't know how to do a chat. I
I
was trying to put our chat thing, our comment.
This book captures the experience of a young Black woman starting from her school days and then when she takes an active part in the movement. My students have read it and they have learned a great deal. Other professors have used that and said that that is the single best source for young people to understand what the movement was about. The book is called Coming of Age in Mississippi. The author is Anne Moody. It's never been out of print. You can find it online. It's an excellent source for learning about the civil rights movement.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Okay, well, I believe, I'm sorry that I keep on going in and out of video, but I have too many instruments in front of me. So again, I can't thank Julie enough, who really was very persistent to have me as your facilitator for the evening and to just be a part of this conversation. I was very moved by both of the stories and the testaments of both writers, and I can't thank you enough for sharing it. And I think it was just as Paul was saying, it was just very apropos for the time that we're in, and it just brought back to light again that, you know, we talk about freedom a lot, but we still are in great need of it. You know, our people are still searching for that. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for bringing your life our light. And may you continue to be blessed and to do the work that's needed.
Thank you so much, Marlene, and your
Yes.
presence has been essential today.
Thank you, Marlene. You were wonderful.
No, Judy, you were wonderful. You
Maybe
were wonderful.
both of
Thank
us.
you both. Yes, thank you both. And Vicky, thank you. And I wish everyone a great evening and a good celebration tomorrow for Dr. King's birthday. Thanks.
Thank you.
And all stay safe.
Thank you.